what I wanted to touch on actually as well, and kind of tied into that, is like the nervous system and the role the nervous system plays in kind of avoidance, and how for avoidant folk, how that shows up, especially when they fall into some of their patterns of like, withdrawing or shutting down or stonewalling and, one foot in, one foot out. Like, what's the nervous system doing in these times?
So I'm not sure. I imagine you're probably familiar with polyvagal theory. And if for anyone that's listening that's not, if you look up polyvagal theory or polyvagal chart, you're going to see a bell curve. And this is such a great, simple way to conceptualize like what your nervous system is doing. Ideally, we spend most of our time in the bottom band of that bell curve. That's your social engagement system, your ventral vagal state. And ventral vagal state is you're in like this, it's a parasympathetic state, meaning rest and digest. You're more easeful, calm. There's no threats. And then the sympathetic state is fight flight. That's when you're responding, evolutionarily responding to, a tiger or some, threat for survival. And what happens in this day and age is we spend so much time in sympathetic state, not just in our relationships, but, you're driving to work, you're sitting in traffic. Like all of that requires an aroused nervous system, an activated nervous system. Even imagery, like inundation of imagery on social media can arouse your nervous system, even if it's subtle. But that chronic arousal takes a toll on your mind and body. You're not meant to stay in the sympathetic state. And the sympathetic state on the polyvagal chart, on that bell curve, is kind of the middle band. So the very top of that band is what we'll call a dorsal vagal. It's like, the top of a dorsal fin. That's your freeze response. It's also parasympathetic. It's also part of your parasympathetic nervous system. But that's your oh shit, I can't escape this. My next best bet for survival is to just like freeze. Maybe they won't see me. Maybe they'll think I'm dead. This is also the state that like when people are experiencing chronic depression, they're stuck in this dorsal vagal state. What happens with someone who's like avoidant, they pick up on a perceived threat in like their relationship conflict. You're communicating something comes up that is uncomfortable, that, they feel accused, they feel criticized, they feel, all those core wounds that we've been talking about this whole conversation so far. Like one of those wounds are touched or just like pricked. And then these protective parts that they have, like these subconscious protective parts, kind of like flare up and perceive this threat. And that subconscious protective flare-up correlates, is very intricately intertwined with like your nervous system. So what happens almost instinctively, because it's your reptilian brain, it's not the center of like logical processing. Your nervous system just responds, it reacts to that threat, and you come up into that sympathetic state. And then very quickly, especially if you spent so much time there, if you haven't addressed these core wounds and you're perceiving so much of the world as like a threat, you have like no capacity to stay here in this sympathetic band, in this fight or flight band in the middle, and your nervous system like flips the emergency shut off, and then you're up here in dorsal vagal, and that's the shutdown. That's the withdrawal. And oftentimes like avoidants early in relationships might have more capacity for argument or conflict, even though they're not like they're not gonna, they're not gonna welcome that in. They're not gonna initiate it. But when their back's up against the wall, they're gonna, they'll fight, they defend, they'll, react, criticize back. It's this blame defense cycle, that it's this vicious vortex. But eventually back's against the wall and they feel trapped, like they can't get out. Okay, let me like play dead. Maybe if I don't move, they won't know I'm here. And that's the shutdown. That's the deer in the headlights. That's the, if you've experienced a lot of trauma in your past, especially, like that might be the dissociated experience where like you're not really even in your body anymore. When you're up here in the dorsal vagal, it's kind of like the point of no return when it comes to like resolving conflict. And you need to, like how you start to kind of overcome this is building bodily awareness. It's really like mindfulness practices, meditation, breath work. And when I say breath work, I'm not talking necessarily like Wim Hof or doing these like peak, like intense breath work experiences. They're like damn near psychedelic. But like practicing breath awareness and recognizing like how you can use your breath to bring your nervous system into a more calm, regulated state. Like if you focus on the exhale, that's going to bring you down. If you focus on the inhale, that's going to bring you up. And your breath is going to start to change in these moments of conflict when you're starting to feel stressed. And as you build bodily awareness, breath awareness, you can start noticing these really subtle cues when you're starting to feel triggered and activated, so you can get ahead of it and implement the tools that you have to keep yourself more regulated. But if you're in dorsal vagal, you know what that shutdown response is. At the very least, if you're tuned in to what's happening in your body, you can use that as like the signal, the kind of the final straw, the light that you need to take a break, that this will not go anywhere. We're actually going to just trigger each other more, and it's going to feel even scarier for the person who's avoidant. The person who's, or like, you know, say the anxious one in this dynamic is going to feel less heard, less seen, more angry, more like, oh, this fucking sucks. Like, you never listen to me. Yeah, because they have no capacity to listen and be present right now. So that's like, that's the time to take a time out. The thing is if you're up here in dorsal vagal, if you look at that bell curve, you've got to go back down through sympathetic to really get out of that freeze response. If you want to get back to like a ventral vagal, really like healthy, relaxed state for your body, your mind and body, you're going to have to elevate yourself a little bit. So doing an activating breath technique, very inhale focused, can help you get out of that. Going for a run, elevating your heart rate, bringing the energy up is going to help you to come back down.
Yeah. And it almost feels quite counterintuitive, doesn't it? Like to bring the energy back up to kind of come back down. But it was something you said about early relationship capacity, right? Because I was thinking of, you know, this anxious avoidant dynamic that is so, you know, famously played out. And it's often the question of the anxious people is like, well, at the beginning, they were all these wonderful ways of being, you know, they had capacity to talk, for intimacy, for closeness. And is it that as the relationship goes on and there's more and more kind of feeling and emotion and the closeness and triggering and touching of wounds, as you've discussed, that the avoidant person's capacity for everything just starts to diminish and get the window for their of capacity just gets smaller and smaller until they often just spend so much time in the dorsal vagal as you described.
Can you phrase that one more time? When they...
Yeah, totally. So at the beginning of a relationship, there's often this like early relationship capacity for feeling and expression and so forth, and like arguments and conflict and dealing with things, and even like a leading and arranging things, and for the emotional side of relationships, with that intimacy and closeness. But is it that as the relationship kind of develops, the avoidant person's capacity for all those things kind of gets exhausted because they're, you know, being in a relationship and so forth, and their window for the kind of tolerance of relationship stuff gets smaller and smaller, which kind of slowly peaks them into this dorsal state where they are much more withdrawn, much more shut down, and they don't have much capacity for the kind of vital relationship activities and actions?
Yeah, so I think in the beginning, there's a couple things going on. Contrary to popular belief, like avoidants want love and closeness and connection too. It's just that the development of that based on their, you know, adverse experiences growing up, what they witnessed, what was modeled from them, they have this almost negative association that as that develops, there are like negative consequences or bad outcomes, that it's like not safe as relationships develop. But it doesn't mean that they don't want it, all right? Because it comes back to that inner child, that 7-year-old that just wanted dad to show up. Or not 7, I don't know how old you were, but that younger version of you who just wanted dad to show up to the sports events. You want connection. And so in the beginning, right, you're in the honeymoon phase of a relationship. You're flooded with feel-good neurotransmitters like, oh, oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine. This feels so fucking good. And these deep core needs of like love, connection, and intimacy that you actually do want are also being met, and it feels more effortless. It feels easy. But I think, yeah, thinking of it as like a capacity, that it does diminish over time, because the needs of the relationship start to feel more taxing, like they take a, a bigger toll, or as the relationship develops and they're, you start to see who they really are. Now it's like, it's not all hunky dory, like it's not all flowers and sunshine, and there may be like little rifts or little points of tension, and every little like micro rupture in the relationship is going to take a toll, especially for probably a disproportionate toll for someone on the avoidant end of the spectrum, right? They're gonna perceive all these little micro ruptures, and it's gonna start to feel like more suffocating. And from a nervous system standpoint, like nervous system's gonna feel a little more on. It's gonna be more on edge, like easily triggered, feel more stressful, and to cope with that, like likely that person in childhood to cope got space from whatever the perceived threat, whatever the perceived like point of chaos or disruption of peace or disruption of their safety. Let me get space from that is how they would cope. So that's what starts happening. They start to pull back from the relationship because it starts to feel like threatening. And there's all sorts of reasons that it might feel threatening. Maybe like they're afraid of the other person depending on them, and they're actually like, they really care about people deep down and they don't want to hurt them. And they feel damaged and broken because there's this disempowering story that they have. And they're like, I'm just going to fuck it up. Like, I don't want to hurt you. And I know that I'm going to. So let me just pull back preemptively now before the stakes get higher, because, oh, I see them getting higher and that feels scary. So there are all sorts of reasons why they might start to pull back. But it's like that capacity for tending to the needs of the relationship start to diminish, correlated with like the honeymoon phase ending and that natural flood of, feel-good neurotransmitters being released as that kind of starts to go away. And they come back down to baseline, and each person, they can start to really see each other on a deeper level. It's like there's this I think there's this protection from really being seen as a big part of it too.